For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. I am your host, Jade Black, and today we're doing a little bit more of a craft-ish episode. I'm talking about getting unstuck, but also a little bit about why and when I get stuck, because I think it's a little bit different for me than for some other writers, and I think this is dictated a little bit by process, and I thought it would be an interesting observation, if nothing else. So because this is a craft episode, what I like to say as a little preamble, I'm not here to give writing advice, I'm just here to talk about my craft, my process, what works for me, all of that jazz. So let's start with why and when I get stuck. And I think one of the biggest reasons why is because I'm so damn strict about writing linearly. I think that can be both a blessing and a curse. Like, it's definitely more of a blessing than a curse for me. But the problem is, when you come across a problem scene, it's there, and there's not much you can do to avoid it. It's just there. And you have to find a way to tackle it immediately, or, 3 weeks have gone by and you've written nothing. And that's not what I want. I don't want to sit for 3 weeks and written nothing. Like, there are certain points, it does vary a bit by project. I might have mentioned this a couple times before, I don't know. But the common places for me to get stuck, well, the really big one is the 10k mark. Which is just so frustrating, because at 10k for me is the moment where I feel like, okay, so this project finally has like a word count that actually means something. There are some, legs here, there's something here, and now I can't write it. It's so annoying to have that moment, but it seems to happen just about every time. The other place I've noticed where I commonly get stuck is the 30-35k mark. And I don't really know why on that one. Because where a project can be at 30-35k, I mean, obviously it varies a lot depending on what genre you're writing or subgenre. I want to talk a little bit, because I alluded to this earlier, about why I'm so strict about writing linearly. Because this is something I've talked about, sort of skirted around a bit a few times, but it's not something I've dedicated any proper time to. And the two big points for me are about the plot making sense, but more than anything is having consistent characters. And I think this is particularly true of me because everything I write is so character driven. If your characters aren't consistent, the plot just does not work. And this is something that I think really was brought to my attention by a project that I shelved a long time ago. I have mentioned this in an episode that I haven't uploaded yet, I do believe, called Oath of Honor. Which, for what it worth, was like some steampunk fantasy adventure nonsense thing. Like, it was kind of like, hey, pick a genre, yes, I want all of them. And for what it's worth, adventure is hard. With that was very, very Frankendraft-y. And what I found... Well, no, let's start the start. How ironic. Oath of Honor, because it was fantasy, I started writing that in third past, because for whatever reason that felt like the right thing to do for fantasy. And when I got to about 10k, I started getting stuck, and at the same time I thought, actually, you know what? I just wish this was first present. So I converted the whole thing to first present. And what I noticed while I was doing that was that I'd sort of written 3 chunks of it. So I'd written the very beginning, I'd written the lead up to the very end, and I'd written some of the, a couple of the early, middle, and late middle scenes. And I found that my main character, Lee, spelt L-I for what it's worth, in each of those 4 segments was just a different person. And what I found, and I thought, okay, well, you know, character progression, I guess. And I started trying to fill in the middling scenes with some of the smaller gaps. And what I found, and this was really bizarre, was that it didn't really matter how I tried to do that. He ended up being, you know, person 1, person 2, person 3, person 4, with a hard switch. And that was that. I couldn't really first draft fix that. And what that meant was, because he was so different with a couple of, I mean, person 1 and person 2, that wasn't that bad. But 2 and 3 and then 3 and 4 was just so wildly different that actually to try and smooth out the character arc to the point where, you know, it wasn't just bad, the plot wouldn't have worked, because he wouldn't have made any of the same decisions for really any of the same reasons or anything. It didn't make sense. And to actually fix it, I would have had to rewrite, at the very least, the entire second half, and then it would just end up being a completely different book with a different plot, and the whole thing was just such a mess. That was genuinely one of the main reasons I scrapped it, but also I didn't like any of the 4 people he was at any point. I didn't like him, like, at all, or many of the side characters. I mean, there is an episode that will be uploaded at some point with a lot more detail about all that, but yeah. And I do wonder if a lot of these difficulties stem from me being a pantser, because I'm discovering everything as I write it. If I was a plotter and knew everything that was happening, who developed in what way and everything, maybe that wouldn't be a problem in the same way. But I don't know. Because I don't rewrite, is the thing. Like, when it comes to editing, I don't rewrite. But so many people seem to, that I genuinely don't know whether these sorts of issues do fall into the plotter pantser, whether that is influence or not. I mean, it would be really interesting, again, to hear from the plotters on this. If you don't write linear as a plotter, do you have these same issues or don't you? I'd genuinely be really interested to know that. So let's talk about the big things that can really get me unstuck at the 10k mark. What I found really important, and this can help even at the concepting stage, and this is something I want to talk about in more detail in just a second, is music and discovering new songs, be that full stop, or new songs that, you know, would fit a playlist, or just an album that doesn't fit with the vibe of any of the rest of the playlist but somehow fits the project. That can really, really help. That can really lead to a lot. And this is something I've found within the past few days. I've been listening to a lot of Leonard Cohen lately. Popular Problems was the one I have known for a while, but I've been listening to some of his other stuff now, so Can't Forget and oh gosh, what's the other one? Old Ideas. And there have been some songs on those albums that have just fit with a couple of projects that, you know, I'm not supposed to be working on yet. And they fit so well, And there's been so much idea generation for these two projects that I genuinely cannot work on for all kinds of timeline reasons. That I really can't wait to start those, and it's kind of a problem, but you know, of my own design. But this is something that also came up for me with Snakebite, and I don't know whether Snakebite's an exception on this one, because Hanzo just is on so many occasions, as you'll know if you've listened to any of this podcast, to be honest. But for him, I didn't have a set playlist or anything I listened to. I flitted between two completely different things. It was Chopin's Nocturnes and Symphonies and all that, and Mini Mansion's album Guy Walks Into a Bar, which is very good. I very, very highly recommend that, and Leonard Cohen, for what it's worth. And with Snakebite, flitting between those two things, and you get that new song thing every so often, I think stopped me getting stuck for a long time. That really, really helped. Which kind of undermines a lot of the stuff I said in the playlists episode, it would seem, but again, I don't know whether this is just Hanzo being Hanzo or what. It's more investigation is required, I think. Maybe I'll do a follow-up episode with that at some point. I think one thing I have alluded to a few times with this podcast in terms of getting unstuck is art and drawing. I do think I've talked about that a fair bit, because I see things really well when I'm writing, but setting things in stone a bit more can also really, really help. And it's, you know, it's good idea generation as well. So one thing I did relatively recently was I drew a picture of two side characters just on their own for Shadow on the Snow. It was Rook and Albatross, and that was the first time I'd drawn Rook at all, because Albatross I had drawn before, Rook I hadn't, and it was the first time seeing her, and seeing her, like, firstly made me fall absolutely in love with her, because she's fucking hilarious anyway, but seeing her like that, somehow just idea generation, it just helped. And I can't really say in what way or why or anything, but it's a big thing for me. I mean, the silhouette portraits I think are the big one that are really closely tied to the writing. They're something I can't draw until I've drafted a certain amount, because I don't know where is a really important location, or what things are particularly important, or how the lighting should be, or because they're so hyper specific to the characters, and not just to the characters but to that particular book as well. So Curtis is as good an example as any. I haven't started drafting his project yet. If I tried to do a silhouette portrait for him now, it would be wrong. And I did actually do this really early. I did actually do a silhouette portrait for him while I was drafting Penstemon? Or it might have been really early Black Executioner. And I tried to do that, and it did come out wrong. Like, the location I had didn't make sense, and the things I had didn't make sense. And one thing I started to realise was that, well, for someone like him in particular, what's important to him changes so much throughout time that effectively, if you took the portrait I'm going to have to do eventually for In the Eyes of the Desert versus one for him at 40, those two pictures wouldn't look even remotely alike, besides his face being on both of them. Another thing I do want to mention with art as well is when I do draw anything related to my writing, it's always super close as well. Even if I'm drawing stuff about, say, Melisande myth, I try and keep that as close to what little I know of the myths as possible, which ended up making the suite very minimalist, which I thought was quite cool for what it was worth. I don't think I've actually posted any of that as of recording this, so mind. But if I'm just drawing a portrait of a character or something, so let's take one I did this morning, General Suniva, who is a character who appears in the Eyes of the Desert. She appears in Black Executioner, that's where I know her from. She does appear in Penstemon as well, but that's more of a cameo, to be fair. But I couldn't just, draw her wearing anything. Like, whether that be, okay, let's just transport her into our world and what she would wear in our current time. No. No. That would be wrong. I have to draw her wearing something that she wears on page, which basically means her armour. I don't think we see her wearing anything else. By the time In the Eyes of the Desert is around, that might be different, but I don't know. But that's a real thing. Trying to draw characters outside of a canon setting is incredibly difficult. It's something I've actually had to do very recently for something I don't know whether I'm technically allowed to talk about it, so I'm not. But yeah, everything has to be super close or I really struggle to do it. I don't know whether other artists have that. I know Alyssa Lausing, author of Keeper's Trilogy, which you should check out if you haven't, she doesn't have that in the same way. The other really big thing I want to talk about, and this is maybe a bit left field with all of this, is insomnia. Because, I guess confession time, I'm a very, very bad sleeper. I really struggle with it. 90% of the time that's because my brain just will not turn off. But I have a real thing about noise. In the sense that if it's too quiet, I can't sleep. I need noise. For whatever reason. What I find on those really long nights where I don't want to use the white noise app because I don't want to be dependent on it because I don't know, to be honest. I mean, really, it's kind of dumb, but on those long nights, and I do wonder if this coincides with me getting stuck. This is a theory. This isn't an active observation I've made. That these people will come to me, and they will bug me, and the things I know will bug me, and I'll sit there and I'll think, okay, I know that this thing happens in a couple of weeks' time, and I know this is where I am now. What happens in that time? What's happening in those couple of weeks or couple of days or whatever? And it will bug me until I get at least one tiny spark to figure it out. And, if you're just lying in bed and there's not necessarily all that much else you can do because, after a while your legs start to hurt and you can't really move them or whatnot. I don't know if that's normal, but you do end up just figuring things out, and then usually once that spark's there, usually that's the moment, and I don't necessarily realise it at the time, that I do fall asleep and things come to me in sort of more dreamish states and things work out, and then my alarm goes off and I realise, oh fuck me, I only slept for an hour, but the pain of being an artist. So let's talk about other things where if I'm really, really stuck, then I'll turn to these sorts of things. And sometimes it really can be as simple as putting the playlist on, sitting with a cup of the right tea, and I do have an episode all about tea and how I have different teas for different projects and all of that. And I actually just bought a job lot of tea because I bulk bought so much of one particular tea because I think it's the tea for Shadow on the Snow. That literally just happened. But it can be as simple as having that tea and putting the playlist on and just letting yourself see that world and see those people and see what you know has just happened, and then just watching what happens after. Sometimes that is enough for me. For whatever reason, sometimes that works. But if it doesn't, and this is something that, again, happened today, actually, something I was thinking about was the current affairs and timeline. Because the day I'm recording this, the October Thrills prompt was what was happening a year before your project started. I wasn't sure what was happening a year before Shadow on the Snow started. And I was thinking, well, Shinichi was kind of just, assassinating. Nothing massively notable was happening for him, I don't think. So I started thinking a bit more about, okay, but let's think about current affairs within Hyukai, and it occurred to me, okay, so the mayor of the capital was just re-elected. And then I got thinking about the timeline bigger in general. That's the re-election sort of triggered a couple of things. And I was thinking, okay, so what else was happening at the same time? What do I know from Mr. Nakagami? What do I know from Snakebite? And it occurred to me, that's when Prince Curtis Emir was born. And I don't think I would have made that connection otherwise. And that's fired off a whole load of stuff, realising that. Because there's one character, I don't want to say who it is, who will appear in Shadow on the Snow. And I've been sort of wondering, okay, when does he appear and when is he not there? Because I know now I'm at a point where he is going to make an appearance for the very first time. And I was thinking, but can he be there? And the answer is yes. Because it's only after this moment that he goes down to Malsau to be with Prince Curtis. And I'm now realising what the event is. As I'm recording this, I'm realising exactly what happened that made him go to Malsau at that particular time, and actually a letter had to be redirected and sent somewhere else because Hanzo must have addressed it to the wrong place. For it, yeah, that letter never reached him. He heard about that whole deal from the other guy. Well, no wonder it happened so quickly. That makes sense. See, there you go. That's not me acting. That's not me pretending. That revelation just happened right there. From thinking about the timeline and current affairs. And now I think I know what the next scene is I need to write later today. There you go. There is some. That's the authentic quality content you sub for or something. Unless you haven't subscribed yet, in which case, do that. But in case I don't have a flash inspiration moment like I just had right there, and lore realizations and all that, sometimes I think a lot about backstory, and this was something I did a lot with Penstemon, actually, because Coney is a really good hunter. He's really, ridiculously good with a bow, and this was a Frankendraft, what it was worth. And if it hadn't been a Frankendraft, I would have realised sooner why this is, and I wouldn't have had to question it. But I did question it, and the backstory was that he was, I don't think this is a massive spoiler, so whatever. He was sort of semi-forced to work as a hunter when he was a kid, and that was all with a bow, and so he's just been doing archery for kind of ever, and when you pick stuff up at a really early age, what that means and all of that. And that explained a lot. And if I think back in backstory for other characters now too, so Helga was another one I've had to sort of do that with and think about. Not necessarily because I questioned anything she could do, because, she's all 55 or whatnot, so you think, okay, of course you know how to do X thing or Y thing, you've picked that up at some point. But just so much as, okay, I'm curious because Arman is asking you things that I don't understand. So, I need to do some digging here so I have any clue what either of you are talking about. The joys of being a panther, by the way. And that's led to a lot of things. Another person I did that with was Hanzo, with wondering why he was living in the situation he was at the start of Snakebite. I had a good idea, but I wanted to be sure. And the other thing I do, I have this many things to do, this is how much I get stuck, sometimes I'll work on something that's completely unrelated, and some of you will have seen me talk about this on Twitter a few times about writing shorts. This is something that really helps me, whether that be, stuff that's a bit later in the timeline, stuff from somebody else's POV, sometimes stuff that's just like actually most of the time in no way, shape or form related, but I'm still in the world, and because everyone and everything is so deeply intertwined, it can still figure things out. And this is why I have unrelated with an asterisk, because it's like, well, yes it is, but also no it's not. You never really know with something like the Tone Ones. I don't know what's going on. I mean, you heard earlier in this episode, I had no idea that one letter didn't reach somebody. Until literally just now, I had no idea. And now, lastly, to finish up this episode before we go on to plugs and things, I'm going to talk about things that don't work for me. So, taking a break generally is like one of the worst things I can do. I mean, sometimes I've found it to be necessary. There's the odd occasion where it works, but generally what happens is if I take a break from something, I just won't pick it up again. Like, ever. And there have been actually quite a lot of projects I've had that have died because of exactly that. I've strayed away for too long, and I've just completely lost interest and motivation, lost track of everything, but also sort of thought, actually, this doesn't matter anymore. Rightly or wrongly. So taking a break, generally, I try and avoid that like the plague. I mean, especially with, like, avoiding writing, full stop. Like, no, that's absolutely the worst thing I can do. And to just write the scene I've been waiting for point, this is again the if I don't write linear, it doesn't work. That's just me, that's my process. If I don't write linear, it doesn't work. Even if that's in a form of a short from somebody else's POV, it just kills my interest. But I think that's about all I have for today. So let's go on to plugs. If you are published or on the way, please do get in touch, let me know. Please do that via email, jade42black@gmail.com. That is on screen for what it is worth. There are probably still legacy episodes being uploaded that say you can contact me via Twitter for that. I'd rather you didn't. I'd rather just keep that to email for my own keeping track of things purposes. There are a few things I would like to know. First, please read the description for that before you contact me, because I don't want to have to give automatic no's or delay reading things, have to ask lots of questions if and when I get inundated. It's no good for anybody. It's the long and short of it. And other things that should be noted, if you are indie or self-pub, you are the people I want to hear from most. If you're trad pub, that doesn't necessarily mean I won't talk to you. Doesn't have to be a novel. Novellas and anthologies and all of those things are very much welcome. Doesn't have to be adults, kidlit and MG and YA, all of that stuff, welcome. Doesn't have to be a particular genre. Just can be poetry. If you're a poet, I'd be interested to talk about that, because I can't write poetry for beans. So where I am elsewhere, if you are looking for the home of the podcast, which you probably are if you're here, that is Instagram. I am J_Black21 on there. On Instagram, you'll get advanced teaser of what episodes are, and little soundbite reels, and all of those sorts of things. If you're looking for the home of my writing, that is Twitter, JadeBlack21. But that is about all for now, so you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing so you don't miss future content. Copyright Jade Blank 2023.